All right. So moving on, the crux of the remaining agenda is a deep dive on two topics. And so this is a cue for Chris Anthony and his panel to come up to the stage here. You may remember Chris Anthony as a leader in CAL FIRE, and he's retired from CAL FIRE but continues this work in numerous ways, and we're lucky to have him as a moderator here. This panel is all about talking about local, state-level initiatives, defining data needs, driving down wildfire risk, and influencing access to affordable insurance. So think about this as emerging big ideas and innovations to help us tackle some of the trickiest challenges we have on wildfire resilience. So I will turn it over to you, Chris. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Secretary Crowfoot. So before I begin, I would actually like to thank Secretary Crowfoot and Regional Forester Jennifer Eberlein for your support of this task force. Your leadership sends such an important message about the critical nature of this work. And I also wanted to take a minute and recognize you, Jen, for your years of service in public lands management with the United States Forest Service. And I have so appreciated working with you throughout the years. So thank you so much. You deserve it.
I'm so sorry. We were supposed to have a break before we launched into these two panels, but I want to, and so Kristen, nobody flagged this for me, but I think Kristen, if you're in the room, Kristen, are you in the room? No, she's not. Okay. Kristen, you were going to lead us, you want to keep on going, but just lead us in one popular item of, in past task force meetings is a little bit of exercise that Kristen leads us in to keep the energy going.
Do we want to do this now or after? Okay, we're doing it now. Okay, stand up. So if you were in Escondido at our Southern California regional meeting and had to act like zoo animals, raise your hand. Okay, well, we are in Marin. We are in the beautiful North Bay Area, so we are going to pretend that of things around here. So really reach up tall and touch the top of Mount Tam. Touch it really tall. Get higher on your tiptoes. Higher, 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 higher. There you go. All right, and now you're going to stretch your arms as wide as the Golden Gate Bridge. Stretch it on either side really far. Okay, and now hug a big coastal redwood tree. Stretch, open the back. Yep. Oh, good. That feels good, huh? And then you're going to, have you guys, so on my bucket list is doing the Dipsy Trail. Who's done the Dipsy? Who's done the double Dipsy? All right. I'm going to come with you next time. Okay, so we're going to climb up the Dipsy Trail. Get your knees way up there. All right, and now go down the Dipsy Trail. Oh, that's a big one. And now we're doing the double Dipsy, so we climb back up the Dipsy Trail. And we go down the Dipsy Trail. And that's all I got.
Well, that is too fun not to do.
Perfect.
Yeah. So big thanks, and then we'll do a little bit of a stretch break and a bathroom break between the panels. So Chris, sorry to take off where you left off.
Yeah. So thank you, Kristen. If there's any workers' compensation claims, just talk to your supervisor, please. So my name's Chris Anthony. I'm actually privileged to be here today on behalf of the University of California, San Diego, where I work as a senior fellow in the Prowess Center. And so the Prowess stands for Proactive Wildfire and Environmental Sustainability Solutions. And so think about the Prowess Center as the proactive or pre-fire side of the equation, whereas The Y-Fire Lab is on the response side, but both are under the leadership of Ilkay Altintas, who is here today. So before we dive in, I would like our panelists to have an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then I have some brief opening remarks. Then we'll move into the lightning talks that each panelist has prepared, and then we'll move it over to the chairs and the executive committee for Q&A. So we'll start with Chief Berlant.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be on a panel after we all just got a little wake-up call here to pay attention. But my name is Daniel Berlant. I am California's State Fire Marshal, and it is my privilege to lead many of the men and women within CAL FIRE that are dedicated towards helping to prepare communities towards wildfires and helping to fund many of the important projects and support much of the local collaboration related to wildfire community resiliency.
Good afternoon. I'm Jason Brooks, CEO and co-founder of Fireside, and I just want to thank the panel for including us up here, and it's also my privilege to support many of the local communities, fire safe councils, with their defensible space and home hardening.
Hi, I'm John Battles. I'm a forest ecologist at UC Berkeley, and I also serve as the co-chair of the Science Advisory Panel with my colleague Steve Astoria from the USDA Climate Hub.
Hey everybody, Jenny Biggs with the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, where I lead our Wildfire Resilience Initiative team and our Special Projects Grant Making team. And I just want to say thank you so much to Chief Anthony and to the task force for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. I also want to say thank you to my fellow panelists, because I'll make your ears burn, but I seek out opportunities to hear you all speak whenever I can, because I always learn so much. So I'm very humbled and grateful to be a part of the conversation. And then last, I just wanted to say thank you to the people who are tuning in and who are in this room, especially people from outside Marin County. I'm a Marin County resident, so I like to say welcome. I'm glad that you're here, and I'm also just really grateful that those of us who live here and those of us who came in have this chance to hear about the extraordinary leadership that we have in place at Marin County Fire and Marin Wildfire. So anyway, it's a good day all around, and nice to be here.
Thank you so much, Jenny. So what I'm about to say isn't a reflection of any federal, state, or local agency or any entity or organization in this room. But we are not moving fast enough to address the wildfire crisis. Although we've made substantial progress in wildfire resilience activities in California, we are still not moving fast enough. No other state in the union has made the investments in wildfire resilience that California has, and those investments are amplified even more when you look at the investments that are being made at the local level, such as what you see here in Marin County, which can be replicated. And yet, despite these investments, we are still being outpaced and outflanked by the size, by the severity, and the complexity of fire. And it's not just wildfire, it's fire. Which makes me wonder how we need to be thinking differently about our approach to achieving resilient landscapes and hardened communities. And as you all know, this is not simply a California or a Western states problem, it is a national and global problem. The past 10 years has seen a large rise in wildfire events on multiple continents. Globally, governments are spending record amounts on firefighting and disaster response. The scale of evacuations and relocations are reaching new levels, underscoring the growing humanitarian impact. And as a side note, I believe that the humanitarian and the downstream economic impacts will eventually drive significant policy change at all layers of government. Wildfires are releasing extraordinary amounts of carbon and pollutants, and fires in boreal forests have nearly tripled since the 2000s. And fires have caused tens of billions in insured losses over the last decade, with the Palisades and the Eaton fires poised to be the most expensive for insurers in United States history. And although we have not seen the worst of it yet, I firmly believe that this problem is solvable. So, If we aren't moving fast enough and there needs to be this greater sense of urgency to what we're doing, why are we talking about defining data needs and not talking about getting more work done, more acres treated, more defensible space inspections, more public outreach campaigns? All of these things are important. And a couple years ago, I would have thought that this conversation was really tone deaf to the realities that we're currently facing, especially in light of what we saw happen on January 7th. But my sense is that we are on the cusp of a much more thoughtful approach to the way we measure and mitigate risk, which will ultimately make us smarter, more efficient, and actually accelerate the work we need to get done in the riskiest parts of California. So some questions I want to leave the group with before I turn it over to our panelists for the lightning talks is, one, how does data increase our ability to identify, quantify, and accelerate decisions to ensure the most effective and cost-effective mitigations are deployed? And two, is a cultural and policy shift needed based on the emergence of new ways of thinking about fire, data, and risk that charts a much more effective path forward? So with that, I would like to turn it over to Chief Berlant.
All right, thank you, Chris, for that foundational discussion. You know, for us at CAL FIRE in the state for nearly a decade, we've been using electronic tools to collect parcel-level wildfire mitigation data, defensible space data, and damage inspection data. This is data after a wildfire on the construction features following a wildfire. And in the last several years, some of it based on the influx of funding from the legislature and the governor, some of it based on legislative requirements, but we've really expanded our data collection. We've added home hardening elements to our defensible space inspections. So when we go out with our inspectors to collect defensible space and make sure they're compliant with state requirements, we're also collecting some preliminary information about the home's construction features at that same time. In 2021, we augmented a lot of that data collection, as I mentioned, through legislation, and we established a program called our Qualified Entity Program. This is where we provide training to local fire safe councils and other organizations. The CCC has been one of the leaders in this space to take a training to make sure they are learning about defensible space to the same standard as fire service inspectors, and then going out and doing assessments on homes, both on defensible space but also on those home hardening and education efforts. In that same legislation, we established a common reporting platform. So regardless of what tool, the inspection tool is being used by these qualified entities, we now have a way to actually pull that data and centralize it into one place. But here, we've really been asking ourselves a lot of questions, especially after we continue to see more and more homes be destroyed. And that really is, are we asking the right questions? So, you know, back to the damage inspection data that we've been collecting. We've got so much data on you know, nearly 70,000 homes that have been destroyed by wildfires. But we expanded and we said, well, what about the homes that survived? What are we collecting on the homes that are still standing? We need to learn from those homes, and in fact, arguably, we could probably learn more from why those homes survived than the homes that were destroyed. But again, that's a learning change for us into shifting our understanding about, again, why this data is so important, and again, why did those homes survive and the others did not. This data has been great. It's been very useful for us. Obviously, we look at it to ensure that we're compliant, or homeowners are compliant with requirements. We use it as a job metric, if you will, to ensure that we're getting out there and inspecting enough homes in an annual year. But we are evolving. Really, we are evolving in how we assess community risk reduction. I appreciated the Secretary mentioning the fact that, because we are proud that we've been able to increase the number of inspections in our jurisdiction at CAL FIRE to over 300,000 each year. But that's great, but what did it tell us? What is it? We know whether people are compliant, but when we look at actually risk modeling and what has been done on that parcel to reduce risk, it's a question still left to be answered. So again, are we asking the right questions? Are we collecting the right data and at the right frequency? Next slide here. In 2023, the legislature tasked us with leading a work group of stakeholders. We brought the insurance industry, we brought academia, we brought local fire, local building, and others, all to evaluate and look at risk modeling. Obviously, a lot of discussion related to insurance on how risk modeling has worked, but this group worked to aim to provide guidance in how to enhance the accuracy and the effectiveness of wildfire risk assessments. That report, again, if you take a picture of that QR code, you'll see they examined many of the factors that contribute to wildfire risk, but also a lot of the complexities and the barriers to access this data. They delved into the current modeling methodologies, but also, again, identifying those limitations and the opportunities for improvement. A lot of at this discussion here. Next slide here. I won't go into too many of I won't go through all of these, but essentially they came out with a number of findings. And that overarching goal of the report was really to improve the state's ability to assess and mitigate wildfire risk, but ultimately protect lives and property. But that work is really now, I think, a roadmap for this discussion in how do we develop and implement more effective wildfire risk modeling practices. If we go to the next slide. We've spent a lot of time to align our mitigations with the insurance industry, with fire departments and building departments, making sure that the core community mitigations we are consistent on. Those really are defensible space, paying particular attention to that first 5 feet of no combustible items, home hardening, and if you haven't heard that term, though, it seems like it is one of the most prevalently used words this past year, but it's how we build or retrofit homes with ignition or ember-resistant materials. Community scale mitigations, like FireWise communities, making sure this work is being done at scale. And then lastly, strategic fuel breaks or green belts around communities. So we have aligned our standard. The insurance companies are looking for the exact same things we are all looking for. But the next barrier that we need to address is how do we overcome alignment in a consistent approach in what data we collect on these mitigations, what's the standard of the data, and how do we make this data accessible? For us, at CAL FIRE, just to preview a little bit of the work that's happening behind the scenes, we are piloting a number of science-based wildfire risk assessment tools to help us be able to identify where should we prioritize our own resources. We have limited resources, we have limited grant funds. Where do we need to put that money in based on vulnerable characteristics of the community, but also based on wildfire risk? And if there's only a certain amount of money, which of the mitigations do we do first, and what order do we use? And so there's a lot more work happening in this space. So I'll just leave you with this, that we are on a really good track of collecting data. We've undergone a lot of effort to better ask ourselves, are we asking the right questions? Look to all of our partners, including the insurance industry, to say, are they, again, the right questions to be asked? But we still need to do more to make sure that that data is consistently collected, consistently available, so that we can all ingest it into what we do to buy down our community level risk. So, sorry, last slide there, and as I turn it over to my partners here, feel free to scan that QR code as well. We have a lot of great resources. If you haven't been to our website at the readyforwildfire.org or the State Fire Marshal's website, a lot of the programs to support community resiliency, including that risk modeling effort that I mentioned earlier, this link will take you to our website. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Berlant. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jason Brooks with Fireside.
Thank you. So I'm going to walk through a very quick case study showing how, building off of what Daniel just said, related to actually how Marin has run a case study solving some of these challenges when it comes to data. So challenge number one, some of us know this, every single parcel is different. Every resident on that parcel is different. They may be a renter. They may be in the home for a long period of time. They may have just moved in. And even every single issue on the parcel is different. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two, and we saw this in Marin, there is multiple local and state jurisdictions, different opinions on ordinances, or not, I shouldn't say ordinances, different approaches to enforcement versus education, and different complexities that come in. Challenge number three is there are all these stakeholders who want to use the data that comes out of defensible space. It could be a resident trying to figure out their personal risk. It could be somebody, a policymaker, who's trying to ensure equity. Or it could be a stakeholder who's just trying to figure out how do they price risk, whether it's insurance or muni bonds. So, case study, how did Marin do this? Marin Wildfire, in the leadership of the board, and Mark Brown, in the leadership of Marin Wildfire, they committed to creating comprehensive data about the WUI, securely collecting it, continuously updating it, because this is not a one and done, and then ensuring consistency across all of those member agencies. Fireside, our organization, we help Marin Wildfire track resilient and vulnerable attributes on every single parcel. We also measure resident engagement in action. We have to get homeowners to do their part, and you need data to understand that. So what does that look like? 95% of properties that were in Marin Wildfire that they targeted were evaluated in the past 24 months. That's over 1 million unique wildfire attributes that are being tracked. That ranges from trees over the house, decks that need to be enclosed, even down to trash cans that are being stored next to the house. As we saw earlier, those trash cans caught embers and were a source of ignition that lost homes. Our policymakers, we're able to now give the policymakers data that is letting them evaluate decisions and actually identify, are they buying down risk? Are they actually changing risk? And right now, there's over 40% of properties in Marin that have no high-risk items on them. There was a question earlier about how do you get the resident to do things. Well, guess what? When you use data and you lay it out for the homeowner and you give them a personalized, customized report that shows this is your property, this is what you need to do on your property, they are 5 times more likely to take action on those items. The simple act of not doing a generic report, customizing it, personalizing it, makes a big difference. Also, when you have data about who is interacting with the content, what kind of actions they're taking, did they look at information about a combustible fence? Did they look at information about screening their deck? You're then able to create targeted messages and targeted engagement media. And in Marin County, they've been able to drive down the cost to get a home to take action by almost $200. And think about that for a minute. There's 70,000 homes in Marin. If they can drive down the cost by almost $200 to get those homes to take action, think of how that starts to scale. Also, when you start to use data, you can identify where the highest risk items are, and you can also identify other homes that could be impacted, not just even on the parcel. So in this case, you can actually start to identify, in this example, where bamboo is located, where the ember shower of that bamboo would go if it ignited, the downstream homes that would be impacted, target financial assistance off of that, and as Mark mentioned earlier, Marin is starting to see a 7-to-1 return on every single public dollar that they put into that with community-level benefit. But most important in this process, with the data, you're actually now able to let all stakeholders understand. I will tell you the #1 question that comes back from residents, we see it all the time, how is my neighborhood doing? How are we doing? And with the data now, you can start to answer that for them. Everything from what are your neighbors doing? How many of your homes and your neighbors have actually cleared Zone 0? What is the public works doing? Are they doing in the open space? They're doing work. And also, who else, what are the top items? Even the average cost to be able to resolve items is all available to them. This can range from a neighborhood to a Firewise community, all the way up to insurance carriers or other people that are pricing the risk. And so with that, if you'd like to learn more, and while I focus very much on Marin, I should share that there are examples from across the state of California and beyond that are available, as well as the Marin Wildfire Dashboard and how this is being deployed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason. And so with that, I'll turn it over to John Battles with UC Berkeley.
Thanks. Great, thank you. As my colleague, Dr. Safard, so well explained this morning, California is a diverse but fire-prone biome. It's a statewide, fire is a statewide process. At the same time, we have different problems with fire across the state. But the shared commonality is that all peoples and all lands are at threat of fire. And and fire is very inclusive. It doesn't care about jurisdictions, it doesn't care about socioeconomic class, it doesn't care if it burns a tree or a house. All peoples, all lands are at threat, and we need a coordinated statewide response. And that coordinated statewide response needs coordinated information. We've made progress. This has been a priority for the task force since we started in 2021, and so we made significant progress. You've heard about the Interagency Treatment Tracker. Back in 2021, to get a statewide perspective on where wildfire mitigation treatments were going on, it was literally a research project. But today, we have the treatment tracker with an interactive dashboard and easily available data. One of the charges that Chris Anthony gave this panel was to say, what is the value of that? Remember, the value is that Fire is a spatial process. If I can see what my neighbor is doing, I can leverage my treatments, take advantage of my neighbor's treatments to flank the potential fires. I get increased return on this investment. It's like compound interest on this investment. Another big significant progress was taking all of the information we have for our wildlands. All of this was public data. Both the federal and state governments had made huge investments in acquiring this data. But back in 2021, we would start with an Excel spreadsheet listing each one of these metrics available, where you could find it. This is literally a spreadsheet for one of the projects I was working on that we would then just have to kind of piece it together at the beginning of every effort. But today, in 2025, we have the California Landscape Metrics that came right out of the task force. We have all 199 metrics that are statewide, they're well documented, they have explanations of what they are, and they're easy to get and just start working with them. These are how we make progress and move faster with good information. But I think we've heard about a lot of it today is that we have some huge gaps. This is a map of the state broken into land classifications, with the green being the wildlands, the yellow being the WUIs, and the orange being our urban centers. And if you look at this just for greater Sacramento area and greater Los Angeles area, it's very clear, as we've heard all day today, that all of these lands intersect. And so you have to have information on all three land classifications, or during a fire, as it moves across jurisdictions, you're going to go black in terms of the information you have. And that's not a situation anybody wants to be in. So we have this gap, and we got to fill this gap. I've tried to sort of get a handle on how we sort of have the information we have available looking at statewide public data. This is a graph where the dots show the amount of metrics we have of the data according to both area on the y-axis and the number of structures on the x-axis. So it kind of makes sense in terms of the size of the wildlands in the state, the 72 million acres of wildlands, that we should have a lot of metrics. And that's where a lot of the fire is. But when you think about structures and people, there's more structures and people in the WUI and even more in the urban areas. But as we get there, the public data is much less available. It doesn't mean that data doesn't exist. It's siloed. It's in local repositories, it's behind paywalls, and some of it is proprietary that companies will not share because it's part of their intellectual property. This is a problem. There is a real cost to this uneven information. This is an example from colleagues of mine at UC San Diego, Judge Boomhauer and his other colleagues. They went and took a look at how much does information, they call it an information deficit. How does it affect pricing in terms of homeowner insurance? And what I'm showing here, this is from their paper, on the y-axis is the relative price, and they're comparing two companies that do property insurance in California, Allstate and State Farm. On the x-axis, they have the wildfire risk score. When there's low wildfire risk, both Allstate and State Farm are pricing their policies at the same time. But as you get into those higher risk areas on the right-hand side of the equation, you see these two diverge. Allstate is in red, and State Farm is in blue. And in the highest risk areas, Allstate is charging almost $2,000 more on average than State Farm. And Boomhauer and his colleagues do a really compelling sort of arguments that the reason for this is that Allstate has less good data. They do not, when they get into high-risk areas, they do not trust their risk models, and therefore they hedge their estimates up, and that leads to higher costs if they decide to stay in the market. So this is a real cost of not having full data on the parcel level. Of course, help is on the way. You heard Chief Berlant talk about the recommendations from his Risk Modeling Advisory Work Group. They made an explicit recommendation for a WUI Open Data Commons with the key data they need to be standardized parcel information to get a better understanding of risk. And then we have a public-private partnership between insurance companies, Cal Poly, with the Moore Foundation to get the WUI Data Commons out there. So this information is coming. It's just not coming fast enough. We need it now, now, now. And when we get it, how do we use it? So we keep hearing from Secretary Crowfoot. He's been telling it to us from the time we started, connect the dots. So when we get this WUI data, the specific WUI data about neighborhood change detection and parcel inspections, we already have an information infrastructure for the wildlands, the California Landscape Metrics. We need to merge that data into the metrics so we have an integrated statewide infrastructure where we can take all of the information we have and we can do wildfire mitigation planning, we can do monitoring and evaluation, and we can get accurate parcel level fire risk going forward. I specifically use the term infrastructure because it takes money to invest in it, to build it, and it takes money to maintain it. It is an infrastructure like everything else we need in this state, and we need to invest in it, and it has value. If you want, these tie back to some of the deliverables that you heard from the Executive Director Wright, that we need to build a science-based framework, and these explicitly support item 21 in 2022 and 22. So we need to get this done, and we have a deadline now of 2025.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. So with that, I'll turn it over to our final panelist of the day, and that is Jenny Biggs with the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation.
Thank you. All right, so I wanted to just quickly provide a little bit of the background on the who and what of the Moore Foundation and why and how we're engaging in this wildfire space for those who don't know, and then just have an opportunity to highlight a few examples of the projects that we are supporting and how those touch ground and can work, we believe, if we are working in close partnership with those in the public and private sector, because we recognize that philanthropy is one small piece of a much larger puzzle. But we can also bring capital that is inherently risk tolerant and more flexible. So when that provides a unique way to get work done that otherwise won't, that's what we're really looking for, is those kinds of targeted interventions. So we can go to the next slide. This one will make me, oh, I can do it, sorry, it makes me happy. So here we are. So the reason I get to do the work that I do, and the reason that everybody at the Moore Foundation gets to do the work that we do, is because of the generosity and vision of Gordon and Betty Moore. Now, Gordon was the always humble and down-to-earth, but also brilliant and visionary man behind Moore's Law. And Betty was the wise and wonderful woman behind Gordon, although she was also out in front of him, especially when it came to fishing. And I wish I had more time for some fish tales. Come find me at the reception if you want to hear about those. But I will say, so Gordon was also co-founder of Intel, but started out as just a kid growing up in Pescadero. He loved fishing in the creek behind his home. Betty, for her part, was a Los Gatos girl, and they met in college, and that really set the stage for them for the next 7 decades to have fishing adventures in the world's most beautiful places, including here in the Bay Area, up in the Sierra Nevada, and farther afield. And they credited those experiences with a lifelong love of nature and an abiding belief in the importance of nature conservation. And so you see that reflected as one of the Moore Foundation's 2 core programs. Now, for the other one, I like to say that the only thing that rivaled Gordon's interest in spending time outside as a kid with a rod and reel in his hand was actually spending time indoors, tinkering with his childhood chemistry set, and literally blowing things up. And he loved that and credited those experiences with his lifelong love of chemistry and with an abiding belief in the importance of science and the scientific method and the serendipitous route that that can take you on to reach your end goal, but also uncover so much new knowledge along the way. And so that's the other real core programmatic pillar for us. Now, with those in mind, environmental conservation on the one hand and science on the other, I don't think it's too much of a stretch for anyone in this room when I say that by 2017 and 2018, it was starting to feel like the subject of wildfire was really encroaching on much of the work that the Moore Foundation does. First, as a threat to environmental conservation globally, including in places where we've invested time and resources in conservation, places like Alaska, British Columbia, here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and in the Amazon. It's also a topic that we know. There is a lot of evidence, there's a lot of existing knowledge, but with changing fire regimes, there are also unanswered questions. And so with the 2 of those, we really wanted to think about how philanthropy might meaningfully engage in this world to help advance wildfire resilience. And so the first thing we did was start to consult with experts, many of whom are in this room and online, and thank you for being gracious and patient because I continue to pepper everybody I can with questions. But really where we landed, and we can go to the next slide. Oh, I can do it, sorry. I have power. Hang on. Was the scope of our work is really across Western North America, focused on a long-term vision of the durable change that we want to see, which is about having ecologically beneficial fire be the dominant contributor in these ecosystems up here for what we see burning every year. Now, the implicit corollary, of course, is that we do not want extreme wildfire events dominating. But part of what we heard from experts from the very beginning was that it was really important to acknowledge the interlinkages between healthy fire-adapted ecosystems and resilient fire-prone communities. And if we weren't thinking comprehensively about that, we would risk sort of promoting a false dichotomy, but to really try to work comprehensively. And so that oriented us there, and also thinking about upstream solutions. And we landed on these 6 different strategies to do that. The 3 that you can see at the bottom are cross-cutting work that is intended to inform and support the work in these 3 core strategies. Now, for early fire interventions, what we're really doing is working on projects where we're supporting grantees who are working to improve early detection and tracking, specifically to enable the decisions to let ecologically beneficial fire burn when and where it should, and also to help respond more quickly and safely and effectively when extreme wildfire threatens. I'm going to get back to the pre-fire community interventions piece in just a second, because that's really the crux of our conversation here. But on the pre-fire ecosystem interventions piece, that is about supporting grantees who can provide modeling for stewardship prioritization, and to help land managers think about predictive fire ecology folding in and understanding changing fire regimes and the conditions that ecosystems will be experiencing in the future, so we aren't just thinking about stewarding ecosystems given the conditions of today, because we want to maximize as much ecosystem function and integrity and biodiversity as we can get through this bottleneck that we can anticipate with increased incidence and severity of wildfire over the next few decades. Okay, so then I will get to the pre-fire community interventions. On this piece at heart, really what we're supporting is modeling to help prioritize and identify those mitigations that will matter most to slow and disrupt fire pathways into communities, and then from structure to structure within them. What we saw happen in Pacific Palisades, what we saw happen in Altadena, and the reality of these fast fires that we know are increasing. They are causing the vast majority of damage and destruction, as we've talked about. They also incur some of the greatest losses. And work that we have supported in that deeper understanding strategy has also shown that the average peak daily growth rates for these fast fires in the West has more than doubled in the last 20 years. So there are going to be lots of fires where we can't stop them, and this is a question of trade-off and time. Can we slow the fire's approach into communities enough and slow the spread within communities to allow fire response to stage more safely and effectively? And that's kind of the balance that we're looking at. Now, of course, to be able to do that, you need good modeling, and one of the things that we have supported is the Xyloplan platform to be able to do that. You also need the data to inform it, and there's just some missing critical data, and we've talked about some of these data gaps. So another thing that we're very proud to be supporting along with Google.org is the Earth Fire Alliance and the work that they are doing on the FireSat constellation. And for those who don't know, FireSat is a low Earth orbit satellite constellation optimized for wildfire detection and tracking. And we'll just be able to see nearly every fire everywhere around the world with consistent data once it's fully deployed. So a really exciting thing, and being purpose-built for wildfire, which hasn't happened before. So that provides that sort of critical data gap piece. But then the other thing we've been talking about is translating data into actionable information, because we know this is a little bit of an art. You don't want to be hampered by critical data gaps, but you also don't want to be inundated with so much information that you can't see the forest through the trees, to borrow a probably overused pun in this room. But you really want to be able to identify those data points that are going to be significant, so that you can think about the baselines for communities, you can think about the targets and where you want to go, and what that is going to mean in terms of changed conditions on the ground and the indicators to get there along the way. So another piece that we have supported on this front, on the actionable data front and accelerating data-driven decision-making, is the WUI Data Commons. Thank you for teeing that up. The idea there is really to make sure that that kind of data, the parcel-level data and the community-scale data, because we know both matter, it's not one or the other, are visible to the CAT modelers and to the reinsurers. And by extension, then you can have insurance price risk appropriately and accurately. And that then helps sort of get this flywheel going in a virtuous cycle where once you've gotten a critical mass of parcel owners to do the work and to drive down the risk, they're also incentivized to keep doing it because there's insurance coverage and there's even possibly lower premiums because they've done that work and the risk is lower. So on that piece, it's really about trying to identify how to turn data into actionable information, and also think about how to extend that work so that it's sustained across time. And if I haven't gotten the hook yet, I have one more piece that I wanted to add. Thank you. So also thinking about how important it is to scale across space. And on this front, we are working with a number of different grantees who are running place-based pilots across Western North America, and we've selected these intentionally to represent very different kinds of ecosystems, different kinds of socio-political conditions, different kinds of economies, and a learning exchange for these pilots and for other work that's underway that is not drawing on our support ourselves, because what we want to help identify across these very different places are the shared challenges and the shared opportunities to see if we can distill like a basic recipe for what we need to get done, and also the key ingredients that are part of that recipe, and being able, again, to understand those baselines, the targets, and how to get there. So just to summarize, I think there are places where philanthropy can help, again, if we're working in close partnership and making sure that anything that we're working on is co-developed by and informed by the intended end users and by the intended community beneficiaries. But looking at ways to accelerate and de-risk and demonstrate solutions, also with an eye to how those can be sustained across time and then scaled across space. And I just wanted to end with a call to action, and I'm going to borrow from Chief Freevault, who is now the director of the Cal Poly WUI Fire Institute, in something that I just saw last week, because I loved this and thought it captured so much of what we're trying to do, and I think all of us collectively in this room, when he talked about hope with a plan to deliver. And I feel like I am so privileged to derive so much hope from the work that I see our grantees and others doing. That plan has to draw on accurate and aggregated and consistent and validated data. And then when it comes to delivery, we are so lucky for the leadership, whether it's local Marin wildfire, Marin County fire, we're so lucky for the leadership of the task force. We're so lucky across this country for the leadership of the state of California, and also globally. We know there are other Mediterranean climates looking to California for leadership too. But it's not just about leadership, it's about all of us individually accepting responsibility. As we heard Chief Tyler say earlier this morning, we have to roll up our sleeves and get this work done ourselves. But there is so much that is already done and known that we just need to get this work done together, stay aligned around a long-term vision of a more fire-resilient future. And then, although it's a big challenge and it's a growing challenge and an urgent challenge, it is also imminently solvable. I know we can do this, so that's my call to action. Let's go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jenny. Amazing. So I just want to, before I turn it over to the chairs and the executive committee, I just wanted to add that I discovered the Moore Foundation kind of at the end of my career with CAL FIRE, and when I saw what they were doing, I wish I had known prior to that. They're such a humble and soft-spoken organization that makes such a big impact, and really thinking about how we connect the work that the Moore Foundation is doing to the state. And so I was really thrilled when the Moore Foundation and CAL FIRE entered into an MOU together to really think more holistically about how these strategies inform each other. And so I really think it's going to be just really impactful in the state. So with that, I'll turn it over to the chairs and the executive committee.
Great. Well, that was a fantastic panel. So thank you all, and thank you, Chris. I have a comment and two questions. A comment is for Jenny and the Moore Foundation. I think I can say this having been in philanthropy. You know, sometimes philanthropy can be fickle and a bit aloof from the stuff that we're working on, you know, with urgency in government. And Moore Foundation has been anything but that. You know, you have been a partner throughout the last several years. You've been patient with trying to figure out, you know, where Moore Foundation can plug into the work that we're doing, and you've been consistent in terms of enabling us to do things that we couldn't do otherwise. So big thanks to you and your team. My two questions are for Jason at Fireside and for John, who does such a great job leading our Science Advisory Committee. So for Jason, amazed and stunned that you can provide that parcel level photograph data for homeowners. I guess maybe two-part question. One is, you know, how does the fire authority socialize that with homeowners, not to completely freak them out that somebody's, you know, looking over their fence, but that, you know, gives it to them in ways that it's going to be constructive. And then two is for other communities that want to do this, you know, what is the cost of that? How do you even, you know, begin to assemble that data? And then for John, you described for me this interagency data hub, you know, in such a compelling way. And it seems like so much of this is connecting the dots. I mean, it's blew me away, the graph of the two insurance companies, and the hypothesis being the difference in rates is the lack of data. So this notion of a WUI data commons sounds so appealing, yet you also point out the barriers of proprietary data that insurance companies have or that private sector companies have, et cetera. So, you know, how realistic is it? And is really the sort of the universal, you know, accessible data hub really what's going to deliver on helping us reform the insurance?
Great, so I'll start with that. So in almost all the deployments that we see out there, the fire department would approach the home, they'd knock on the home, and they'd ask the homeowner for permission. So it's always by permission that they're invited on. I will tell you, depending on the community, it's high 90s. I mean, like, I think in Marin County, we're talking 50, maybe 70 people have said no to the service. People don't want their homes to burn down. So when the fire department says, I'm here and I will help give you information that will be customized and tailored to you, they're very interested in that. So generally speaking, super high adoption rate. In some of the more different communities, a lot of times our fire safe council partners, instead of the fire agencies, will be the ones to go on. So some communities where they're not comfortable necessarily with the government, with an employee, the fire service council will go out and do the evaluations in that case. To your second question around the usage and the cost of the data, it does come down to, I'd say, collection boots on the ground, right? They're putting people out there, they're going house to house, and they're engaging that. And what we see in the data is that when you make that personal connection, when someone knocks on the door and talks to the homeowner and then gives them that personalized information, they're like 3 to 4 times more likely to then take action off of that. So it's so important to build that human connection at time of evaluation.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one, we've seen Marin County do it. And so you pretty much have at least a WUI data commons already being used in Marin County. And can that be replicated at the scale of the state is a question. You heard Chief Berlant say how much CAL FIRE is doing. So they're already collecting an enormous amount of data. I know with the WUI data commons, there's been, you know, how do you get the insurance companies on board? And I think one of the ideas would be they all use the same data. And then they can have their own proprietary models and risk assessments. And all of that actuary work can be totally a private goal, but this data, everybody could share it and they'd be on a level playing field. And it's also, quite frankly, it's a public safety, public health issue in some ways. So, you know, I know there's issues about privacy, but it really is like, if you can't see if you don't have the information on how this fire moves between these systems, and it seems like it puts us at a huge disadvantage, both pre-fire and during fire.
That's helpful. And maybe then a follow-up for Daniel, our state fire marshal. So do you envision this data that all of your defensible space inspectors are collecting, these 300,000 points of contact? Is that figuring into this public comments, this interagency hub?
Yeah, absolutely. But we have to make sure that even when we're going out and doing inspections, that we're collecting the right amount of data. Again, we know you have vegetation a certain feet distance from your home, but what kind of vegetation if you're in violation? You know, that's going to play a major difference in the ambers that are going to be produced in your overall risk. The other piece of this that's really important, in the land that CAL FIRE is charged with protecting, we are overlaid by almost 95% where homes live with a fire district. And so there are all these other layers on top of us. In addition, we don't permit the home. The building department does. And so we don't have all of the construction elements of building construction and infrastructure that are critically needed in this conversation. So it can't just be the fire department, the fire service, the fire safe councils. The building industry and local governments are a critical partner in this overall conversation.
I would just also add that what also makes, you don't need 100% compliance. I mean, the study by Boomhover and his colleagues was done on 100,000 parcels, and you get a huge insight. So if we had just 50% adoption, then we could model that, and so we wouldn't need complete compliance. So you could get statewide coverage without having to go to every parcel in the state.
That's helpful, and I want to let in other members of the committee. I guess my follow-up question, John, it seems like we all agree on the problem statement, which is more data in the WUI. We've got pieces of that puzzle being assembled, including the great example in Marin. Do you feel like and this maybe for Patrick too, do you think we have a clear pathway to an interagency data hub with this scale of data in coming months? And if not, it seems like we need that pathway.
No, exactly. And I skipped over this in my talk because I wanted to wait till now to help answer that. This is a really challenging topic. We have seen just an explosion of private sector tools and data sets in California. We get questions all the day. Should we be using Xyloplan? Should we be using Land Tender? Should we be using Planscape? We don't, you know, a struggling RCD in San Diego needs guidance, needs help, and we need to answer the question, what's the state's role? Do we sit back and let the private sector go? When is it appropriate for the state to come in and run that data set? At a minimum, as Daniel and John have said, the highest priority is to have common data sets. What we're saying on the landscape scale is it's great if there's a dozen different decision-making tools out there, but if everybody's measuring fire risk and carbon storage and water quality differently, we're gonna have a problem. The same is true on the community side. If Marin has an 80% compliance rate and San Diego does, are they the same? Or are the rules so different that it doesn't really tell you if one, this is a point that Chris has been making over and over again, we need to standardize that. So what's our next steps in all this? Well, as we often do at the task force, we're reaching out to the best people we can find to guide us on this. So we're gonna have, this is action number 21 or 23, we're looking to 5 people and entities. First and foremost is CAL FIRE. Daniel and his team are doing a lot of work on this. We're also looking to Jenny and her team because they've incubated a lot of these tools. We're looking to John to make sure we have the science community with us. We're looking to Ilke Altines, raise your hand, from San Diego. That's where the data hub is being sort of modeled and pioneered. And to Marissa Christensen, who's here from the Climate and Wildfire Institute. They held a full-day workshop 2 days ago exactly on this question. What are the data sets we need? What are the modeling we need? Where should they be housed? So what they're going to try to do, that sort of coalition of 5 people, is give us a preliminary framework and roadmap in a month, by May 1. That's in the action plan. And then by the fall, we're going to work with CAL FIRE to say, based on that overall framework, we're going to start to develop the consistent, reach agreement on those consistent data sets we need. Because everybody is screaming for it right now, particularly with the executive order. People are wanting to gear up. They want these tools. As Chris and John have said, we got to do everything we can to help folks out there better plan, prioritize projects. And we have the tools, it's just they're scattered, they're all over, so we need better guidance on where the gaps are, how we can fill them in. And I know I keep saying this, what's the state's role? How do we facilitate this? Do we let the private sector run? Do we develop some of them in-house? Inevitably, it's going to be a combination. But we're definitely on it and making it a very high priority. And I don't know, Daniel, want to add to that, but you guys are definitely taking the lead.
Yeah, I think that that's going to be the pivotal first question here is what is our true role? Because some of these entities that are collecting data or where we're going to access data, they're not going to be keen on sharing the data. And so I think we need to have some broader conversations about what that data is going to be used for and what the value of the outcome of having the state manage or have that data in our hands. And so those are some of the first conversations. Again, the roadmap to just start this process itself is going to be a very difficult first step.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Abby.
Yes, I have a question, I think, for Ginny or Jason or John. Well, really, any of you. You know, our office, we're launching something called the Vulnerable Communities Platform in a couple of months here, which really combines climate hazard data with social factors and really links between climate impacts and social vulnerabilities. And so sort of part of my question is, how can we better include like long-term social dimensions of wildfire risk and vulnerability, you know, in addition to all the great environmental data that we have, to make sure that we're really considering the long-term community resilience needs, really centering vulnerable communities?
I'll start and hopefully they'll add to, but I would say, first of all, the social dimensions are so important, and I'm all in on data and modeling. I love that stuff. And also, I think we have to keep in mind that what we're ultimately trying to do is truly decrease the vulnerability of communities and ecosystems. So there's no substitute for the social pieces that actually need to happen, including actually doing the actions, the mitigations, and getting those on the ground. On the piece about layering those in and having a picture of the social and the ecological conditions together, for I'm grateful for a chance to now spotlight one other project that we've been focused on, which is not as much from a risk perspective, but actually more from a resilience perspective. And we've been funding the team at NCEAS, UCSB, to build a Western Wildfire Resilience Index. And that does incorporate a lot of those social factors. And it's done with public data sets, and you can drill down, you can get specific, you can drill back out again, so you can see how the index is calculating the numbers that you see. And there's no proprietary black box there, which I agree is so important. So that's just one piece that I would add in there and encourage people to take a look.
Building off of that, I would say two things, right? So, and I'll use Marin, starting with Marin as a good example or case study. There has been the inclusion of social vulnerability data, neighborhood by neighborhood, to then actually assess. So all of that information I was showing you, what's on a parcel, what's happening, what parcels are taking action, is being considered with socioeconomic factors involved. And then that influences some of the policy decisions, right? Because there might be a more affluent community where they're doing certain things, a less affluent community, and now you have information about how that risk is actually changing. A second example I'd give you in Napa County is where we actually, for low-income homes, they get up 100% match. So we deliver that for the homeowners that are qualified low income, and then they get funding.
Yeah, I would just point out, that's why you have to have it all together, right? All the information needs to be together. So in the California resilience metrics, we have a lot of the CalEnviroscreen factors in there. So you can look at fire risk, you can look at socioeconomic capacity, you can look at all these factors together. Is what Patrick was saying earlier, that there's multiple benefits. There's also we need to trade off. I mean, there's going to be some burden and there's going to be some gains, and those need to be equitably shifted, and you can see that. And that's where it is hard to get the social and economic ones pinned down, but we do have some in there.
Please, Supervisor.
Great, thank you. This is a great panel and lots of good information. I wanted to provide two quick perspectives. First, from the perspective of a rural resident who is my colleague, Lake County Supervisor Jessica Paiska, who lost her insurance when an insurer used data from drone footage, taking photos of her house, told them that they were not going to reinsure, and then wouldn't share those images with her. So, right, there's data sharing and privacy issues there. And second, from the perspective of insurers or reinsurers, so in Napa County, we've been fortunate to have great winery partners who are doing major landscape level work, and so they brought out their reinsurers from London and other places to show the work that they had done, and so many of those insurers and reinsurers said, wow, we did not know this was happening. So I think we can easily assume that insurers have information that they may not have. And so I really like this idea of the data commons because I think it raises the bar for everyone. And we can't force a private company to use a particular model or algorithm, but we can say, hey, this is here and available to everyone, so why do your numbers look different? So I think it's great to hear, and I think this conversation about where it lives, and to your point, John, about the infrastructure investment needed there is huge too. So thank you.
Yeah, that's helpful, and I wanted to thank Patrick for raising the University of California, San Diego, and the Climate Wildfire Institute. So big thanks to you all for advancing this conversation about a data hub and for doing the workshop just this week. To me, I've been a little bit deferential on this question of insurance because we obviously have an elected state insurance commissioner who's focused on this. We have our policymakers, as we heard today from our assembly member. But it does seem like, John and Patrick, it will be important to engage the insurance industry as we put together this data commons or this data hub, because it seems like there's no more important user of this data potentially than insurers to help us avert or start to resolve this insurance crisis that we're facing. So just any questions or any thoughts on engaging the insurance industry in this discussion?
Well, it's actually Ginny can speak to this at length, but they're developing it in partnership with the insurance companies for that reason. I think one of our issues is making sure that because of all the privacy issues and other issues, is that doesn't preclude that same work being used by public agencies, your local fire districts. So how do you develop a data commons that insurance companies can use, but Marin Fire can also use? Right? And so how do you get through the confidentiality issues? How do you get through the money issues? So it is challenging, but we do need to start talking to the insurance world more. In particular, I think there's a lot of opportunity to partner with the FAIR Plan and the insurance company, because that is a public sector model, a public sector program. Probably going to have better luck working with them than with the private companies. Not to say that we don't want to work with the private companies, but I think we need to, at the task force, the same way that we're beginning to partner more with utilities, we got to start partnering more with the insurance world, because all of this data is equally important to us. I agree. I don't know, Ginny, if you want to add more to that.
Well, I think that was just one of the comments from my colleagues who wrote that paper, was that they didn't see the wildfire and the insurance people talking. And they clearly saw that disconnect from their academic side. And then the other point is that it said it cost them 18 months and $200,000 to put 100,000 pieces of information together. And so it's like a huge cost to them to get that understanding. And that, and partly it was because they had to piece stuff together and figure it out. And so the idea that we may need to expand perhaps the breadth of this task force to include the Department of Insurance.
Good point.
I will not talk at length about insurance, but if anybody wants to come talk about it over cocktails at the reception, I'm happy to talk then. But I will say—
Fish stories or the insurance crisis?
Yeah, I don't know. I might rather go with the fishtails. The other thing that I would just say is that part of this process in developing the WUI Data Commons is actually engaging subject matter experts, including those from insurance. And part of what I think the solution needs to be is understanding how to use abstraction for both the concerns from individuals who are concerned about privacy, but also for those insurance companies. So I think there's a way to build that in, and they're working through that. But I think that's got to be part of the picture.
Secretary, if I could just add one thing. In this conversation, in this space, the insurance industry often gets painted in a very bad light. And I just want to go back to the work that's been done over the last 5 years with the insurance industry to align our mitigations. There is agreement by insurers of the type of mitigations that need to be done and what that standard is. You all heard from Steve Hawks from the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, a nonprofit funded by the insurance industry, but that is the leader of who the insurance industry is looking for towards these mitigations. We got there. So I think we can get there with this data. The affordability and access is a very complex discussion that we're not going to solve here. But I think to your specific question, I think we can easily get there related to data sharing. And one other piece that I think we can mirror this discussion, my colleague, Director Caroline Thomas-Jacobs, has done so much work in the utility space to really get a data lake of sharing data between insurance companies. And I really think that she will be an important conversation of how that effort to get utilities to share their data can help influence this conversation with the insurance industry.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I know Carolyn Thomas-Jacobs, who leads our Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety, has been here today, and we have colleagues. Oh, she's here right now. There she is. Thanks for all your work. And I note that what we know as energy safety, or the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety, actually had a summit in Sacramento earlier this week with utilities on wildfire mitigation. So that's a great point. And then also, we do have team members and colleagues from the Department of Insurance who work for the Insurance Commissioner, who regularly engage and are even here today. But I do think we should think about, as we're building out this data, how do we engage insurance companies, because we want this data to actually help us solve our challenges, protect communities, and part of this is obviously helping address these challenges with insurance. So, Chris, any final thoughts, or I turn it to the panelists on, I always ask the question, if you had the magic wand, what would you have us do as public agencies, local, state, federal government?
If I was going to sum that up, I would say that we don't lose this moment that we're in right now to really accelerate the change. And I feel like we do have this moment in time to really do that, and we also have different tools available to us to really think differently about what this next phase looks like. I think we've learned a lot in the last 5 to 8 years, but I sense that there is a shift that's occurring, and I think, probably speaking for most people in this room, like, we don't want to miss this opportunity to achieve what we know is actually achievable.
This is your magic wand opportunity.
I can't resist. So, good. I mean, start now. We're already behind, right? Why do we need all this data? Because we need to price risk, right? We need to do things with this data. And you know what I showed you from Marin? I mean, this was started 3.5 years ago. This wasn't just, oh, they went out last week and collected all this information. It was a systematic commitment. And so I would just challenge, I guess to put it back to you, is if you're not starting tomorrow, we're already behind. So why not start tomorrow?
Can I wave a wand? I got my wand out too. I think the other thing that I think would be great to have in parallel is just if I could instill magic somehow, making sure that we have some critical mass of communities that are actually demonstrating what this needs to look like and achieving it so that we can actually look to those as examples, lighthouse effect, and be able to replicate that.
I'll just conclude on my end, and I've shared this with Patrick and Forrest, our team have, that this is not a problem we're starting from scratch. There are so many efforts, you know, many of them being funded by the Moore Foundation, a lot of good work by our risk modeling work group in our office, that we can take that work as foundational and build upon it. We don't need to necessarily start from scratch. We need to take the lessons learned from those efforts here in Marin that's already been done. Again, I use the utility model as a part of the conversation, the alignment on the mitigations. We just need to build upon that foundation, bring everybody in the same room. Even the earlier panel talked about sometimes conversations aren't always easy, and this one's not going to be easy. But we need to get all together in the same room, have the conversations, and again, I know it's achievable.
Yeah. John?
My magic wand would be to live our model all together now.
That is so excellent. And I'm so tempted to let that be the last word because it's so elegant. But that being said, Ilka and Marissa, I'm interested to know if you both and your entities are leading this conversation. If Chris doesn't mind bringing the mic down to you, I'm just interested if you have any comments or reactions to this discussion with a focus on what we should be doing. And please introduce yourself and your organizations.
Marissa Christensen, Executive Director of CWI. Oh, okay.
And I'm always bugging people about the acronyms.
Hi, everybody.
What's CWI stand for?
Climate and Wildfire Institute. And we're a fairly new organization. We were formed in 2022. And one of our major missions is to sort of be the federating entity of all the data that our panel here has just talked about. The workshop that we hosted just a couple days ago was 70 or so of some of the leading experts, not only in the wildfire industry, but in insurance as well. And we had some really good discussions around how the insurance industry functions and how we might be able to help influence the black box that is their risk modeling. And so that is something that we're very heavily focused on. We do actually have an action plan coming out of the workshop that we hosted, which has never happened to me before. For anybody who hosts conferences, it's kind of impossible to get real actionable steps coming out. So very excited that we were actually able to walk away with something tangible. So more to come on that. Thank you, Wade.
Thank you. Looking forward to that.
Hello, Ilka Altenteich. I'm a faculty at UC San Diego, also a board member of CWI. I think data and science are enablers in this space. We have bigger challenges than we could ever imagine, and more science is being enabled by the challenge, more data is being enabled by the challenge, and most importantly, more collaboration is enabled by that. As Chris said, we have this moment in time. Are we going to build the right infrastructure, right structures, right innovation models, so we can identify gaps together, we find ways to incubate those solutions, and we find ways to partner so we can scale and sustain those solutions into the future. If we don't find a way to solve this problem and open our data, our models, open doesn't mean everyone has access to everything. But having the right data with the right model, creating the right processes to communicate them so they're actionable, and creating the right interpretable mechanisms so everyone who has access to these have better democratized interface to these tools is, I think, the future. And I would love to see us come together cross-sector to create that future. That's my magic wand.
Well, thanks so much for, yeah, let's give it. And I want to note, as Patrick said, it's actually item 22 on the list of 25 deliverables, which holds us accountable for, by September 1st of this year, working with the entities represented here today to identify this pathway forward. And the action item right before that is specifically on really achieving and setting up this data hub and exactly how we'll be able to do that and answering those questions. So that's a major area of focus here for coming months. Big thanks, Chris. Big thanks, panelists, for all of your all the work you're doing and providing insights here today. Let's ask them for one more, or give them one more round of applause.